Well, we welcome you today to our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast as we're looking at the book of Revelation. And we're in chapter 15. We just started that yesterday looking at these final set of judgments known as the bowl judgments that are found in the book of Revelation. So the chronology of the book, the timeline of the book is starting to press on here at this particular point. The earlier chapters 12, 13, and 14 did not advance the timeline, but this does. And we're going to have a great worship service just prior to the final judgments being poured out, these bowl judgments. And this is not unusual in the book of Revelation. As a matter of fact, before each of the other major judgments that were poured out, there was a worship service before that. If you go back for a moment, you see in chapter 6, the first set of judgments, which is known as the seal judgments. There's 7 of them, and they begin to be poured out in chapter 6. Just prior to that, however, we have this wonderful worship service in heaven, perhaps the greatest example of heavenly worship anywhere in the Bible. We have that in chapter 5 and 4. Chapter 4 and 5 deal with the worship of God the Father and God the Son by all the angelic host. It's a glorious, glorious worship service. Then in chapter 6, verse 1, then he says he saw one of the seals broken by the Lamb, and these judgments began to pour out. The same thing is true of the second series of judgments, known as the trumpet judgments. Those are picked up in chapter 8. Actually, the 7th seal judgment contains the 7 trumpet judgments. That's the content of the 7th seal, and that's all begins in chapter 8. But prior to that, there again is a wonderful worship service. Go back to 7:11. And it says there, the 4 living creatures, he saw them and the elders, and they fell down on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. So prior to the pouring out of this series of judgments, we have the angelic beings, once again, the heavenly beings, especially the elders and the 4 living creatures worshiping God. So when we go back to chapter 15, we're ready for this next series of judgment. This series goes back actually to chapter 11 and verse 14, I believe, when it speaks of a third woe coming. Remember, the final 3 trumpet judgments were called woes because they were so horrendous, so horrible. And the third woe was coming, it says in 11:14. And then in 15, it announces the trumpet judgment, the 7th trumpet judgment, but doesn't give us much detail about what it's about. And now we go to chapter 15, and what we're going to find out is this 7th trumpet judgment. The content of that is the 7 bowls that are going to be poured out, actually beginning in chapter 16. So he's not quite to the bowl judgments yet, but they're going to be poured out. Chapter 15 is this worship service that precedes the pouring out of these bowls of judgment. So once again, we're very consistent. We have the wrath of God, the judgment of God being poured out on those who have rejected him. But prior to that, we have a worship service in heaven. So God is doing nothing that's wrong, nothing that's evil. When we get upset sometimes to think about the wrath of God or the judgment of God, it's because we don't truly comprehend the magnitude of sin and the holiness of God and all that goes into that. But the angelic beings, the heavenly beings, do comprehend this much greater than we do. And we find them worshiping the Lord as a result of that. When in chapter 15, verse 3, then, as we go on, we find that they're going to be singing, as part of this worship service, 2 songs. And the first is called the Song of Moses, the bondservant of God. And the other is the Song of the Lamb. So the Song of Moses, that's found back in chapter 15 of Exodus. The people of Israel had come out of the Exodus in Egypt and had gone through the Red Sea, and God had given them a miraculous victory and an escape there. And Moses in chapter 15 begins to sing a song. And the song goes on for about 18 verses here. I only want to read maybe what we might call the refrain in verse 2. The Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my Father's God, and I will extol him. That kind of summarizes Moses' song. And this song, by the way, is sung several other times in the Old Testament at very important turn of events as well. But we have here that this Song of Moses speaks of the strength of God and the salvation of God and the praise of God and the worship of God. And so this Old Testament song that goes all the way back to the Exodus is a song that we find that the angelic beings are singing at this worship service. But that's an old song. They're now going to sing a newer song, and we'll pick up that new song next time. So you take a look at that, and we'll get together next time to see what God's Word has to say. You have a wonderful day in the Lord.